Let's design the Kimberly blouse. Hi everyone, I'm Glenda with SureFit Designs, whimsically and oftentimes referred to as Glenda the Good Stitch. Let me introduce you to Kimberly. Kimberly is a young woman who has been sewing for a while, but she didn't really have any formal education except for her junior high and home economics teacher. She loved sewing, but whenever she put anything on, it didn't fit her. And she actually wondered if she was going to be relegated to the sewing of curtains and quilts for the rest of her life. And just before Christmas, she ended up going to an estate sale. And when she got down to the basement, there in a corner was sitting a beautiful machine that had her name written all over it. She couldn't resist. She took the machine home and started her quest for how to get a good fitting pattern. And she ended up on my YouTube channel, which is of course SureFit Designs. She watched a number of the videos that we offer, and they helped her to decide that she wanted to work with SureFit Designs to see if that was the answer to her fitting issues. She not only did that and got her SureFit Designs kits, but she went to Amazon and got herself a serger and decided this was her chance to really move forward to get a well-fitting pattern. Along with that, sometime in January, she joined our Facebook group and started participating and commenting along with everybody else. And one day, Kimberly posted this blouse, which sparked a tremendous number of comments. Here you can see it. Everybody wanted to know how she designed it from her body blueprint. They also wanted to know the fabric that she used. Kimberly, of course, so generously shared her answers with everybody. And I decided, since there was so much interest in this blouse, that I would make one for myself and also show you the process of how to use your body blueprint to create this very, very simple garment and end up with an excellent fit. So obviously, you're going to begin with your SureFit Designs body blueprint. Of course, in the industry, it's called the sloper. And I've just drawn off my size actually here. It doesn't matter whose size it is. And what's important is that when you've got the bodice drawn, this is right off of the master pattern, then what you're going to do is attach the skirt to it. Because in Kimberly's blouse, obviously it came down into her hip level, into her lower hip level. So with SureFit Designs, you know that we have these sideways T markings at the waistline of the center front and at the waistline of the center front of the skirt. And so you take your sideways T markings and line one right up over top of the other, and you use your grain board to make sure that center front is totally 100% parallel and one on top of the other. And then what you're going to do is tape this together and tape it well so that nothing is moving. And I'm actually going to turn this over real quickly and tape the underside as well so that it's nice and stable here. Okay, let's put that back in position. So now the question becomes, what do I do to create Kimberly's blouse? So first of all, let's take a look at that. I'll bring Kimberly back here. You can see that center front is on the fold of the fabric. So with the pattern like this, center front is going to become the fold. And then the darts in this waist fitting area, there's a couple of things that you can do with this. And number one is you can sew them the way they are, but that would make this a really form-fitting blouse. Or you can completely disregard them. If you're very rectangular shaped, you really don't need those darts in there. Or you can do as Kimberly did and as I did, which was to divide this dart in half. And then I'm going to make what I call a half-width dart. So from the regular stitching lines, I'm going to divide again in half, and on both sides I'll do that same thing. And then I will take and connect the tip of the dart to those half-width markings, like this, and Now I'm going to be able to sew my half-width dart. So what this means is it gives it a little bit of shaping, but not an excessive amount. So it's just going to skim nicely over your body. And then at the side seam, I'm going to do a little blending so that it's not a sharp point coming into the side seam. So just take your designing stylus and just blend smoothly to give yourself a little bit of extra fullness in there so it hangs nicely. And then you'll want to decide how long would you like your bodice to be. Kimberly's, I think, was about 8 inches long. Mine's 9 inches long. So you then draw your hem level where you want it to be. And it just, again, depends how short or long you want your top to be. And then you could add on an 1.5 inch hem allowance. Actually, on the one that I've made, I've added on a 1 inch hem allowance. So this marking on my ruler is exactly 1 inch. And you can notice that I'm drawing this in a separate color so that you can see the distinction here. Now, before I actually add the seam allowances, we need to deal with this sweetheart neckline. And so on your body blueprint, and of course you're making a copy of your body blueprint so that you always have preserved exactly what you've done to your blueprint to get the best shape for your body, we're going to design a sweetheart neckline. And with Kimberly's, she actually came down about 1 inch on her shoulder line. And when I was communicating back and forth with her, she said, you know, if I had to do it again, I would likely only come down about 3/8 to 1/2 inch. So I'm going to mark a distance that is 3/8 of an inch wide. And then you have to decide from the hollow in your neck down to where you want that dip in the sweetheart neck to be. And on mine, I'm going to do it 3 inches down because I have a fairly high bust and not a lot of cleavage to go with it. But you could be 3, 4, or 5 inches down. It just is going to depend where your apex is and how low down you'd like that little dip to be. Now I've drawn this in pencil, but I'm going to come back with the designing stylus and I'll draw it for you again so that you can see the actual curvature of that sweetheart neckline. And it's just a slight curve coming down like this from the dropped neck point that I did. And then I'm going to take the other curvier edge of the stylus and I'm going to make a curved line coming down into center front. So that's going to be the cut line for the sweetheart neckline. And the next thing we need to do is add seam allowances. Let me grab that back. And so I'll start up here at the neckline, and there's the curve that I just made for the dip in the sweetheart neckline. And because of the orientation of the designing stylus, I need to see the seam allowances, I need to slip the stylus up like this, and it exposes that line that I just drew right along the edge of the slot that's nearest that outside edge. And then I know I'm going to be getting a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So I'll make a few little dotted lines like that. And then I'm going to move that tape down out of my way of the stylus. So then I'll find this curve. I'll do the same thing. I'm sliding the stylus in and I'm going to draw a 5/8 inch addition on this point. So now I've got my seam allowances there. The rest of this is very easy. You just use your stylus and set it back in place. There's the shoulder line. And here's the armhole. And you all know that I always suggest doing this in pencil because you can see what's happening as this pen is smearing as I'm moving the designing stylus around. So always use pencil, please. But you can see that I'm now putting the edge of my pen, or your pencil, on the edge of the designing stylus slot that's nearest the outside edge. And there's the dart shape. And now I'm going to turn the stylus over so I can see this curve that I made at the side seam. And there's the 5/8 there. And I'll add the 5/8 going down the rest of the side seam into my hem level. All right, so that's added the seam allowance. Now, the next thing to do at this point is realize that you're going to need to face that neck edge. So you'll just take another piece of tracing vellum and put it in place on what you've just previously drawn on that neck edge, and then just to be safe so that it doesn't shift around, I'm going to put a couple little pieces of tape just to hold that vellum down, because it's so easy to knock it off shape once you've started drawing. And now you just simply want to trace the shape of the facing. So I'll come in again with the designing stylus. There's the stitching line. There's the cutting line, the 5/8 inch allowance. And here's the shape of the neckline this way. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with designing your own facings, a facing to me is anywhere from about 2 to 2.5, sometimes 3 inches wide. I don't like skimpy facings because I don't think that they sit as well on the inside. So all I've done is begun this. Now you need to establish that the facing, the piece that's going to sit down inside. So I'm going to do this facing approximately 2.5 inches wide. So I'm starting at my new neck point, coming out 2.5 inches, and from the line that I just drew, I'm just going to give myself some marks at 2.5 inches, and that's going to guide me in establishing the shape of the facing like this. And so then I'll take my designing stylus and I'll just start joining these little lines together, those little markings that I made. And then I'm going to curve the center front just a little bit. And I'm going to connect center front. And of course, center front is on the fold for the facing, just like the blouse is. And then to do this curve, to join it all together, I'm going to use the front crotch curve on the designing stylus. And there, whoops, one more thing to do, and that's the shoulder line. So now you've created a facing that is going to fit perfectly into the shape of your garment. So that finishes off the blouse front. And you know, there is one more thing I should say to you before I pull this away. The fabric that Kimberly used was a knit fabric, and that's what I've also used, as a knit fabric. Now, typically with SureFit Designs, when you have drawn off your body blueprint, it's drawn off and sized to your body using a woven fabric. And the bodice itself is going to give you 2.5 inches of wearing ease. Now, sometimes with knits, that's actually too much ease, because the knit stretches and it's going to just feel bigger on you. You don't need as much ease when you're working with a knit fabric. So very frequently, I will tell you to come down at least one series of measurement dots all the way around your pattern when you're working with a knit fabric. But there is a caveat to that, and that is, how stretchy is that knit? If it's a very, very stretchy knit, you might want to come down like 2 or 3 dots. But if the knit doesn't have very much stretch, I might just leave the pattern the way it is and then base that side seam and then decide if I want to take it in any. The rest of the garment likely isn't going to need any changes. So with the knit fabric that I used, here's the selvage. It's kind of a funny wonky selvage there, but here's the crosswise of the fabric, and you can see that it's got quite a bit of give. Had I cut this on the crosswise grain line, I would have sized down at least 1 size dot. But I didn't want the pattern going around my body this way. I wanted the pattern going up and down my body this way. So when I take a look at the horizontal give in the fabric like this, it's not anywhere near as much as the crosswise give. So did I say that right? It's the horizontal, because I took this, just a minute, let me redo this. This is the crosswise or the horizontal, and this is the vertical stretch, right? So the vertical stretch doesn't have a lot of give to it, and that's what I wanted to put around my body. And so as a result, when I drew my pattern, I didn't size it down at all, but it's all going to depend on the stretchiness of your knit fabric. Okay, so now let's move on to the back of the pattern. And it's so similar to the front that I went ahead and, turn this over, I went ahead and I drew the bodice back, and I lined up the sideways T markings, and I also made this the half width dart, and I blended at the side seam. And so the only things that I really need to do to the back of the blouse is, number one, I need to change the neckline, because you'll remember on the front I dropped the neck point 3/8 of an inch, so I need to do that on the shoulder line of the back of the blouse as well. Now I'm going to take that 3/8 of an inch all the way around to center back, and then I'll just take the designing stylus and redraw that back neck curve like this. And I'm sorry that the pen is smearing on you, but again, when you're using pencil, it's not going to happen with you. Now, you'll also notice that on here, I said center back seam. Well, if it's a knit, does it pull over your head? And yes, it might. If it's a very stretchy knit, it might pull over your head. But because of the way I was putting the direction of the knit going around my body and not knowing if this neckline would pull over my head, I decided that I wanted to put a center back seam and put an invisible zipper up the center back. And so that's why you're seeing me call this a center back seam. But when you draw your pattern, it comes as if it was on the fold. So you draw this out, and to add a center back seam, all that you're going to do is take your designing stylus and once again add the 5/8 inch seam allowance up the back. And this is strictly your choice, whether or not you put a seam up the back or whether your knit is stretchy enough to pull it over your head. That really is an option that you can decide on. So besides adding the seam, lowering the neck, and changing the width of the dart and just blending the side seam, there isn't a lot of designing that you really need to do to the back of the bodice and to the back of this blouse. I will add the 1 inch hem allowance at the bottom, because when you design a pattern, you typically want to work with a stripped down pattern, and a stripped down pattern means that it doesn't have any seam allowances on it. It's always easier to see what you're doing in the design if you don't have seam allowances already on the pattern. And so what I'm doing right now is adding the seam allowances, again, by simply using the slots provided on the designing stylus to add the required seam allowances. And coming into the armhole, it will look like this. And after I get the seam allowances done, then the next thing is to do the back neck facing. And we'll begin that in just a moment. So now here's the new neckline that's been dropped a little bit, and that finishes off the bodice back and the blouse back. Oops, don't put it away yet because I have to add the facing. So here's another piece of tracing vellum. I'm just going to lay that on top. Again, I'll put a couple of little pieces of tape here to stabilize this so that I don't knock it off the lower pattern. And now I can begin drawing the facing. Because the front was 2.5 inches wide at the shoulder line, I'll also do this 2.5 inches wide, and I'm measuring down, of course, from where I had previously drawn the neckline, where I'd lowered it. And then I'll draw it all in for you so that you can see it. So there's a 2.5 inch wide facing. The nice thing, those of you who use the tracing vellum, I know you love it, and it's because you can see so clearly through it to trace off these lines so quickly. Again, because I'm doing a seam at center back, we've got to put the seam allowance into the facing, and here's the curvature for the neck, and there are those seam allowances. And one last thing that I need to do is just connect this curvy edge for the rounded portion of the facing. And that finishes off the facing for the back of the blouse. Now, one last pattern piece to deal with, and that's the sleeve. You can see how quick and simple this project is to do, and I know you're absolutely going to love it. So because I'm working in a knit fabric, you're going to be using the sleeve that does not have an elbow dart in it, because you all know that SureFit Designs comes with 2 sleeve options, one for a woven fabric with the elbow dart and one for knit fabric without the elbow dart. And so obviously knit fabric, knit sleeve, no elbow dart. Now I love a 3/4 length sleeve, and Kimberly's was also a 3/4 length sleeve. Now in Kimberly's, she just let her sleeve hang. One of the features that I love is this little piece of elastic shearing that I often put down the center of my sleeves. So let me show you an actual 3/4 length sleeve, and then I'll show you what I did to create this, because I actually went a little bit longer. What you need to know is your shoulder to elbow and then shoulder to wrist level. So my shoulder to elbow is 12.5, and I've made a mark right there to indicate it. And then my shoulder to wrist is 21 inches. So if you want a true 3/4 length sleeve, take the distance between your elbow and your wrist and simply, okay, this is 8 1/8, or 8 1/4, I should say. So half of that is 4 1/8. So there's approximately what Kimberly did, which is a 3/4 length. Now because I put my shearing in this sleeve, I wanted my sleeve a little bit longer, so I divided that distance in half once again and said, okay, that's how long my sleeve is going to be to there, because I'm going to take this little bit and I'm going to shear it with 1/8 inch wide elastic. So that's my hem level, and I'm going to just set this on the grain board so I get a nice even level for that hem. It's going to come across like this. I'm going to put a 1 inch hem allowance on it, so I'll draw like this, and because this is going to turn up, and when this turns up you need that little bit of flange on the outside, I'll show you how to get it absolutely perfect. Where you want your hem to turn up, you're going to fold your tracing vellum right on that hemline, and then you can see where your cutting line is right here, and you can see where your stitching line is. And I'll do that same thing on this side. And then when I turn that over, this now gives you your exact cutting angle. It's just the reverse of where this is going to flop up inside, so that you make sure you get the correct width on that hem allowance. And there you have it. That's the 3/4 length sleeve for the Kimberly top. You have to realize that Kimberly has done this all in about a month and a half. She is just charging down the road. Since this blouse, she's posted a second one, very similar style, and she's also put up her dress. She's posted some fabric that she's going to be making another dress with, And the last communication I got from her is she's now moving on to the Sure-Fit Designs pants pattern. Needless to say, you can agree with me, she's getting an excellent fit, and this can happen for so many of you. I do hope you've enjoyed this designing project. And like Kimberly, I would invite you to join the Sure-Fit Designs community, and you can do that very, very easily. Number one, make sure to join the Sure-Fit Designs newsletter. You'll find that on my website at surefitdesigns.com. Go to the bottom of almost any page and you'll see our sign-up form. And when you do, you're going to get some free gifts to get you started. Number two, make sure that you do like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that when I post new videos, you'll become aware of them. And that's just not surefitdesigns.com. Sure-Fit Designs is my YouTube channel. And then please join our Facebook group. All you need is a Facebook page, and you're welcome to put in your application and we will approve you, and then you'll be able to communicate with others around the globe who are interacting with one another, showing their Sure-Fit Designs garments, asking questions, and in general, having fun with Sure-Fit Designs. I do welcome you to join us.